What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new, hey, I'm Sydney. Every single Thursday I sit down and I talk about the craziest true crime in every single state, the one that stuck out to me the most. So if you like true crime, you should subscribe. Welcome back, Sydney. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, now down to the stage. Sydney being gone for 2 months. A lot of life updates within the 2 months that I haven't posted, so here we go. And if you don't, we'll just go ahead and skip if you don't want to hear. But I'm engaged. What? Sydney's engaged? Yes. Aaron popped the question and it's kind of been crazy. I've been wedding planning along with I moved up to Arkansas, which is why you see a different background and a different setup. Also, if you see a glare, I still have the clear thing on it, the clear plastic thing for the protector thing. I don't want to take it off because I'm scared that I'm going to mess it up. It's my pride and joy, so I don't, you get it. I'm just gonna let that fall off. Like, I'm gonna let it fall off. If it ever does, I don't think I'm gonna take it off. Maybe unless I find somewhere more permanent where I'm not having to constantly put it in and out of its box to move, because I've moved 3 different places in the last 3 months. Like I said, moved to Arkansas. I'm with my fiance here, and then also I got accepted into the forensic psychology master's program at ULM. I will be receiving my master's degree in forensic psychology. True crime has opened my mind up to wanting to do that. I was kind of stuck because I graduated with my bachelor's in criminal justice. I was really stuck on like exactly what I should do with that. I don't know, like I know that psychology is very research based, and so I was like, well, maybe I could do something with that. And so the more that I looked into it, the more I was really excited. So I decided, hey, might as well just go get your master's, do something like this for the rest of your life. You get to see why criminals' minds work the way they do. Anyways, so yeah, sorry for 2 months. I've had so many changes. Oh, here's the ring, by the way. Here's the ring. So I have this little setup. I think I'm blocking this. It's a fingerprint. Nothing important. I don't know where I got it. I don't know whose fingerprint it is. Today is Michigan. Last video I posted was Maine. I posted Maine last. And that was the pedophile priest John Giogan. You know, that guy, he sucks. This guy sucks too. Yeah, so he's the worst. And hashtag the worst. I just wanted to put a disclaimer. I'm no longer going to be typing up the disclaimers. They just look really grainy. They don't look good. So I'm done typing it up. I'm going to give a disclaimer. First off, of course, this is true crime. It is murder. It is something that is very sensitive topic for some people. If that is something that you are squeamish about, I don't believe that this channel is for you. And I don't mean any disrespect to any of the victims or their families. This is just for true crime entertainment purposes, research purposes, things like that. It's by no means to be disrespectful or malicious in any way. And so yeah, this is just disturbing and could be to some audiences, so viewer discretion is advised. But without further ado, we will just hop on into it. This is the Michigan Murders by John Norman Collins. All right, so starting off, John Norman Collins was born on June 17th, 1947 in Centerline, Michigan. Not a whole lot is said from his upbringing, but it did say that his mom and his dad did not have a good relationship, and his dad eventually left John and his mom. She quickly remarried after that, and it didn't last very long because he was an alcoholic, which it also stated that John's actual biological father, not his new stepfather, was also an alcoholic and was abusive, so she couldn't really seem to escape and get a good guy. When John was just a toddler, his stepfather used him as a shield whenever they were both confronted by a man with a gun. Imagine your stepfather using you, a toddler, to pick you up and hold you in front of, like, in 1951, John and his mother moved to Detroit, Michigan, along with his 2 other siblings. This is where she met and married William Collins. William took in the kids, adopted them as his own. That didn't last very long either because William was also an alcoholic. I think this marriage only lasted 5 years because it ended in 1956, just whenever John was only 9 years old. This kind of just shows that he didn't have a father figure in his life. It just fits that narrative that he already had 3 father figures in just a matter of him being alive for only 9 years. In 1965, when John was 18 years old, he graduated high school. During his high school years, he was an honor student. He graduated as an honor student. He kept that up throughout high school, along with being captain of the football team, or one of the captains of the football team. He was president of the chess club, and he was one of the star pitchers of the baseball team. So he was the best of both worlds, you know. He was athletic, he was smart, he dated a lot of girls in high school, but the girls said he was very aggressive sexually and physically, so he couldn't really keep a girlfriend. So the best of both worlds, no Hannah Montana, you know what I'm saying? Right out of high school, John enrolled in Eastern Michigan University, and this is where he joined the Theta Chi fraternity. He was in this fraternity, he was studying education at this university, but due to suspicion of him stealing, he was kicked out of the university. No, he was kicked out of the fraternity. Sorry, he was kicked out of the fraternity due to him stealing. During his sophomore year is when John's grades started to decline. One of his professors thought that he cheated. John just kind of, I guess, ran with that role that like now he was stealing, he was cheating. So he started committing like really petty crimes just for fun, because I don't know if he turned from this like really smart, athletic kid to like this bad boy type, but it seems like that was what he was aiming for whenever he got to college. It doesn't state if any of these petty crimes he was caught for, or even if it was true at all. This is just something that he stated, but it doesn't show that he was caught for these, so it is possible that he was just making this up. But he did say that he had a friend named Andrew who went along and, you know, just tagged along with these petty crimes that he did. I don't know if he didn't want to do it alone or just kind of wanted somebody to drag down with him if he did go under. I don't know. During his sophomore year, still the same year that he started committing all these crimes, he found out that his pregnant sister, who was with, didn't say a boyfriend or a husband, but the guy that she had a kid with, she was cheating on him with another man. Well, John decided that he was gonna go beat this guy unconscious, and then he ended up going and beating his sister so bad until she bled, while he was just calling her all these derogatory names like a tramp, a slut. That's really all that basically states about John, just kind of the lead up into him starting off with being the bad boy type, having petty crimes, and then beating his sister, and you know, just little things. This is where some women start to go missing. On July 9th, 1967, 19-year-old Mary Flazar was reported missing. Almost a month later, on August 8th, her body was reported found by 2 boys that were walking near an old farmhouse in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Listen, I'm gonna put the word down here. I have heard the translation and I still cannot for the life of me say this word, so I'm so sorry. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but this is where she was found. Mary was stabbed around 30 to 40 times in her chest and in her abdomen. Her feet were severed off of her body just above the ankle. Her thumb and parts of her finger on one hand was missing as well. Her forearm that was on the other arm, not with the one with the damaged hands on the other side, was also found severed off and missing as well. Mary's body was so decomposed that she had to be identified through dental records. And in the examination of the crime scene, it showed that Mary's body was moved 3 different times from the initial, where her first position was when she first passed away. Her body was possibly first laid on a pile of bottles and cans, and then she was moved 5 feet away where her body was just kind of exposed now in the open, and then she was finally on her last position, dragged a few feet where her body was found near that farmhouse. A neighbor had seen Mary walking alongside the sidewalk leading up to her apartment, and she was being followed by a blue-gray car along the side of her. The neighbor stated that the driver of the car would pull up next to Mary and say something to her, and Mary, she could see Mary like shake her head no, as if the driver had asked her to possibly, hey, do you want to ride? And every time Mary would just say no and walk away from the car, but the blue-gray car would still like follow beside Mary. Something happened that was very creepy at Mary's funeral. A random stranger had walked in and asked if they could possibly take pictures of Mary's body, and whenever they were told no, I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. It was just, I don't know. I just can't imagine somebody like coming in, like for instance, like a family member's funeral, and then somebody asking to take a picture of the body that you've never seen before. It's creepy. And when I'm creeped out and uncomfortable, I laugh. So I'm sorry, I'm not laughing. After the stranger was told no, he explained that it was for the family's keepsake, that someone had sent him to go take a picture of Mary's body. After being told another firm and last no, he decided to just get up and leave. Didn't say a word, just walked out, and then the family explained that they didn't send anybody to go in and take a picture of Mary's body. This funeral home employee that was having this interaction with this guy explained that he was tall, and he had dark hair, he was very handsome, and whenever he left, he got into a blue-gray car. This man, also the man that had asked to take the picture, the funeral home guy said he didn't even have a camera with him. So how would he take a picture of Mary's body if he didn't even have a camera? You can't take a picture without a camera. On July 5th, 1968, 20-year-old Joan Schell's body was found in a construction site in She was raped and stabbed to death as well. She was last seen by her roommate, Susan. Susan explained that she remembered seeing her go to the bus stop on Washtenaw Avenue on June 30th, and that was the last time she had seen her. She knew that Joan was going to see her boyfriend, so didn't say if they looked into the boyfriend, but the boyfriend explained that she never made it to his house. It is known that Joan had missed her bus and she decided that she was going to hitchhike. Well, there was a red and black Pontiac that contained 3 white men that pulled up and asked Joan if she wanted a ride. Susan tried to talk Joan out of getting in with these men because, for one, she doesn't know who these people are, and it was just kind of coincidental these people are here to get her a ride. But Joan insisted that she'd get a ride with these boys, and as soon as she got to her boyfriend's apartment, she would call Susan. Well, Susan explained that there was one guy that looked kind of young, and he was tall with dark hair. But it was a black and red Pontiac. It wasn't a blue-gray car, so I don't know. 3 hours went by and Susan still had not heard from Joan, so she went to the police station and filed a missing person report. Joan was stabbed 25 times, where a few of the wounds had punctured her lungs. That's how far the stab wound went in. There was also punctured wounds on her liver, a wound that was found behind her ear on her neck that had fractured her skull. Her throat was slashed, and she also had her miniskirt tied around her neck. Although Joan's body was found, she had been dead for a few days. It showed that where her body was discovered couldn't have been there less than 24 hours, meaning that wherever she was killed was not where she was found. So somebody had possibly moved her body to this location. 2 months after Joan's murder, there were a few eyewitnesses that explained that they had saw Joan walking with a young man with dark hair who was tall. And this was on the evening that Joan had disappeared. The witness that had came forward basically explained that this was John Norman Collins because he matched the description perfectly of what Susan had stated in her initial missing person file. So John was taken into police custody, and they were just going to question him, figure out, John's side of the story. John was very personable, very calm. He denied everything. He said, "I don't know who Joan is. I have been at my mother's house this entire past weekend, and she lives in Detroit." So police decided, hey, this guy's very calm, he's chill, he's not very defensive, he can't be the killer, and they never even looked into his alibi. March 20th, 1969 is when 23-year-old Jane Louise Mixer posted on her college bulletin board that she needed a ride back to her hometown in Muskegon. Jane was a student at the University of Michigan, but her plans to go home were to explain to her parents that she didn't want to be at the University of Michigan anymore. She really wanted to go plan this whole dream in New York City. Jane's body was sadly found in a cemetery lying across a grave in Denton, the Denton Cemetery. She was fully clothed, covered by her own raincoat, and then a book I guess she was reading was laying right beside her. The autopsy revealed that Jane had been shot in the back of the head by a .22 caliber pistol, along with strangled with a nylon stocking. What is with old killers and nylon stocking? I just realized that has been on. It has faded. My apologies. I'm so sorry. I need to do better. So now that we have this backup, I'm so sorry. Anyways, what is the point of killers with nylon stockings? I need to know. So Jane was not sexually assaulted, but her tights that she was wearing had been lowered to mid-thigh, along with her underwear that exposed a menstrual pad. So this shows that the sexual aggressor, along with possibly the murderer, was turned off, and his sexual tension came to like a halt whenever he saw that she was on her period. It was determined that Jane was killed in the early mornings of March 21st, but her body had been moved to that cemetery at a different day. So she was killed somewhere that was not this cemetery. Although Jane's death was different than Mary and Joan's, police and investigators started to believe that this is possibly by the same perpetrator. They wanted to try and connect the cases as much as possible. Only a few days later, on March 25th, is when the construction worker of the construction site that Joan Shell's body was found the nude body of 16-year-old Marilyn Skelton. She was found in the exact same construction site that Joan's body was found. One investigator explained that in his 30 years of police work, Marilyn's body was one of the worst he had ever seen. The autopsy of Marilyn discovered that she had multiple fractures on her skull, covering a third of her skull and all of one side of her face. All of these fractures and wounds were caused by a heavy blunt object. The autopsy revealed that Marilyn had been excessively beaten and tortured. Her killer had ripped off a piece of her shirt and shoved it as far down her trachea as he could, possibly where she choked, but it was mainly to muffle her screams, according to investigators. A garter belt was tied around her neck, along with several deep lacerations of her body. It was believed to be possibly from a leather strap. Lacerations are just like really bad, deep bruises. And the worst part of her body was a branch from a nearby tree was found lodged inside of her lower region. There was some churned soil and blood splatter around where her body was found, so it showed that this is possibly where her murder took place. Marilyn was a known drug user and a dealer. This doesn't mean she deserved it or she was a bad person. That's not what I'm trying to say. Investigators believe that this was possibly a drug deal gone bad, but an investigator that was smart actually believed that there was no way this was drug related. This had to be by the same person that had been doing this with other girls. Now there are over 20 investigators working on these homicides, and it all came down to around 6 common denominators. All of the victims so far were white girls with brown hair. Each victim was beaten with a blunt or bladed object. Each victim was found in the radius of the Washtenaw County. Each victim had knife wounds to the neck. Each victim had an article of clothing around their neck, and each woman had been menstruating at the time of their death. And it makes me want to go back to the body that was found with the pad. It's like, was it the pad that he saw, or I don't know, it was just kind of odd to me. So it could be possible that it wasn't the same person, but it has to be the same person, because the one body he didn't want to touch because of the menstrual pad. I'm not trying to justify that, but it's just confusing, I guess. This is where police decided to publicly announce that at least 3 of the victims had been murdered by the same person, but there are still some differences in the crime scenes. On April 15th, 1969, the body of 13-year-old Dawn Basom was found on a country road in She was only missing for a day when she was last seen walking from a friend's house that night. Dawn was found wearing only a white collared shirt and a bra that had been pushed up to her neck. She had repeated stab wounds to her chest and her lower abdomen and her genital area. She was found slashed across the breast, her butt, and her stomach. She was also strangled to death by a 2-foot-long electrical cord that was left knotted around her neck, along with a handkerchief that was stuffed down in her throat. The orange sweater that Dawn was last seen wearing was found in a farmhouse that was around 100 yards away from where her body was found. There were some glass particles that were found in Dawn's shoes along with the floor of the farmhouse, which gave police reason to believe that this is where the murder had possibly taken place. On May 13th, the farmhouse that had all of the evidence, this entire crime scene, was destroyed in an act of arson. There were 5 clipped lilacs that were found in a straight line across the driveway leading up to the farmhouse, which had investigators believe that this was the murderer kind of taunting with them, saying, "I burnt down all of your evidence," and also 5 victims so far, so they believe that this was like a symbol for each victim that he has. On June 9th, almost 3 months later, there were 3 teenage boys that found the partially nude body of 21-year-old Alice Elizabeth Calum that was found near the burnt down farmhouse. Alice was a graduate student at the University of Michigan. She had only been missing for 1 day prior to where her body was found, so literally the very next day is when her body was found. It didn't take very long to discover it, sadly. In a gravel pit, there were 2 buttons that were missing from her raincoat, along with dried bloodstains that kind of gave investigators a theory that this is where the murder had taken place. Alice had multiple stab wounds on her body, including 2 that had punctured her heart. She was shot in the head before her throat was cut so deep that it severed her spine. There was also a small gunshot wound on her thumb, which indicated that she possibly had put her hands up to protect her and shield her face from where he shot at point blank range. Alice had also been raped, along with all of her clothing scattered around her body except for 1 shoe. She was missing 1 shoe. By July of 1969, there had been over thousands of interviews, along with ruling out 1,000 convicted sex offenders, and they also had to sort through over 800 tips that came through, which led them nowhere. But at the same time, they were having to deal with all of the university students feeling super unsafe. Many students armed themselves and walked in very, very, very large groups. Tear gas, knives, and security lock cells absolutely skyrocketed at this time. No one dared to hitchhike because they didn't know if they were going to get in the car with the murderer. They just didn't want to take that chance, of course. So it was just like, this was a really scary time that police were having to deal with a serial killer that still has not been locked up. I don't know if university students were possibly harping on these cops to like get the perpetrator and get him locked up, but I can understand the frustration and the fear. You gotta figure out who this is. On July 23rd, 18-year-old Karen Sue Bynum disappeared. She was reported missing by her roommate due to her failure to return back after going to a wig shop downtown. 3 days later, Karen's body was found lying face down in a gully. She was found nude and beaten with lacerations so deep that it had actually tore some skin off and exposed tissue underneath that skin. She had multiple skull fractures and brain injuries, along with her shoulders, neck, nipples, and breast being burned by some type of agent that she also was forced to drink. As with other victims, they had found something lodged in her throat, like a type of clothing that was in her throat. Karen's official cause of death was strangulation, although all of her brain injuries and skull fractures and everything would have ended up being fatal. She was raped prior to her murder, along with her underwear being clipped off and shoved inside of her with human semen and hair clippings. But the clippings that were found inside of her lower region were blonde. Like, they weren't her hair color, which was dark. But also, John Norman had dark hair. So whose blonde hair is this? So police enforced a media blackout. They said, "We are not going to tell people that we discovered this body so that we don't tip off the killer that this body had been found. So maybe they could possibly catch him trying to go back and move the body like he had done before. So they had taken the body of Karen and replaced it with a mannequin. And while the officers were observing and scouting out, they did see a tall man with dark hair go up to the mannequin, realize it was a mannequin and it wasn't the actual body, and run off. Employees at the wig store that Karen had went and visited explained that they remember her saying that she's either the bravest or dumbest girl because she just accepted a ride from this guy on a motorcycle. So the description of the young man that she got on the motorcycle with matched exactly John Norman Collins, and the patrolman said that he actually knew him because he was a brother of his in this fraternity, the university that they went to. Like, they were both in the same Theta Chi fraternity. He also explained that he had seen John riding around the same motorcycle around campus earlier that day. This patrolman's name was Larry, and he questioned John, and John admitted. He said, yeah, I have been riding my motorcycle in that area today. Larry took pictures of John and took it back to the wig store where the employees explained that, yeah, that's John. He matches the description. That has to be him, okay? Like, it has to be him. But they couldn't say for certain. So male friends of John described John as, you know, very polite around women and patient and kind. But women explain that he's very overly aggressive and sexual. He's very just short-tempered and engaged in violence against women. So several of these women explain that John was very angry whenever they would explain that they were on their period. One of these women revealed to police that while her and John were making out, he started groping her breast, and she had to put a halt to it and explained that she was on her period. John became so enraged that he yelled at her that she's very disgusting, and they left her apartment. John took some delight in explaining to his co-workers about the victims that were found linked to the Michigan murders. That was what was being posted at the time, Michigan murders. And he explained that he knew all of this information and the victims and how the crime scenes were because of his uncle David, who was a police sergeant. David, the uncle, explained that he had never ever told John anything about these murders. He denies it, but John was explaining details of the case that was not released to the public. It was very private information that nobody except the police would have known. Investigators confirmed that John Norman Collins had possibly had to be the perpetrator or an acquaintance of whoever was committing these murders because he knew at least two of the victims because he was neighbors with Mary and Joan at one point. And John also dated a girl who lived across the street from Dawn. On July 27th, police decided to go to John's house and tell him he has to come down to the station to take a polygraph test if he wants to be cleared. But John kept insisting that he was innocent and he refused to take the test. Later, John's roommate Arnold explained that he saw John coming out of his room with random objects in a box, and he wondered why John was doing this. But he remembered seeing a shoe. Remember this one missing shoe? John just ended up telling Arnold, I'm just trying to get rid of some things. It's just cluttered. My place was cluttered. So David, the uncle of John, was on vacation at the time that Karen's body had been found, and he returned 3 days later after her body was found and taken in. And John was actually dog sitting and just house sitting for David while he was on vacation. While John was dog sitting, David came back to see that John had just randomly painted David's basement black. It's funny because it's random. I mean, obviously it's to cover up evidence, but it's just like, how would you feel if like you had somebody dog sitting and just house sitting for you, and you came back and like they're just painting your entire wall? I'm sorry. When David decided to scrape away at the paint, he found a stain that was like underneath the paint that was covered that appeared to be dark and red, like a blood stain. So he didn't want to deal with all this. He went back up to the station and explained to them what he had found, and his home became a crazy forensic examination. Like, they needed to go in and not paint the basement black, but just figure out what happened in that basement. Despite all of the evidence that was against John, his nephew, he didn't want to believe it, but he just knew that something was off with the whole ordeal. When police arrived at David's basement in the initial investigation, they explained that the red stain was actually red varnish, but there was numerous blonde hair clippings all over the floor. David told investigators that him and his wife have a child that has blonde hair, and he gets his hair cut by his mom in the basement all the time, but it did not explain that there were 9 different blood stains on the ground that were blood type A, which matched Karen Sue's blood type. The hair that was found on the ground of the basement, along with the blonde hair that was found in Karen Sue's underwear, came to be an exact match after being sent to a detailed forensic analysis. John protested that he had absolutely no idea who Karen Sue was and how all of this happened and why he's involved, even though evidence concluded that Karen was at one point in David's basement, either if it was before her murder, during her murder, or after her murder. So it's possible that the murder even took place in David's basement. Was it a cover-up? Was it John doing that to explain possibly David is the reason for all of this? One of David's neighbors explained that she heard muffled screams from a woman from David's household at the time of Karen's disappearance. On August 1st, 1969, John Norman Collins was formally arraigned for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman. Police were later contacted by their counterparts that were located in California, where they explained that they had reason to believe that a resident of Michigan named John Norman Collins was responsible for the death of 17-year-old Roxy Phillips. 2 of the Washtenaw County detectives decided to fly to the police station that was located in California so they could possibly connect the murder between John and Roxy. Before Roxy disappeared, she told a friend that she was acquainted with a Eastern Michigan student named John. John and his old roommate Andrew, remember the petty crime Andrew that was acquainted? That guy. John and Andrew had went to California on June 21st so they could tow this camper that they had rented, and they were gonna take it all the way back to Michigan. John was driving a blue-gray car, but they used fake names whenever they rented this camper. John returned back to Michigan with this camper alone, and Andrew was found in Arizona. When police interviewed friends of Roxy Phillips, they discovered that John and Roxy had become friends due to this one girl named Nancy. Nancy explained John to be John from Michigan. That is what Roxy explained him to be as well. And he was tall, had dark hair, and he was at Eastern Michigan University studying to be an elementary school teacher. That's what John was for. He was in education. Roxy's body was found nude with a belt that belonged to her dress around her neck, and she also had one earring missing. She was strangled to death, and a lot of her belongings were strewn across Route 68. The trailer that John and Andrew had rented went through a forensic examination, and it was completely wiped of fingerprints. Andrew's grandpa told police that he knew that Andrew was in Arizona. I don't know why Andrew was in Arizona. I don't know why, but the grandpa explained that they lived in the trailer in California and then they abandoned it. But the trailer was found in Michigan. I don't know. Investigators believe that there was enough evidence to link Roxy's murder with the Michigan murders, and an FBI warrant was issued to find Andrew in Arizona. But on December 18th, prosecutors explained that Andrew said he had no knowledge of the murders. There wasn't just enough evidence to keep him as a suspect, so they denied him being a suspect at all. John Norman Collins was indicted for the murder of Roxy Phillips in April of 1970, and all evidence of Roxy's murder was to be sealed off until after the trial of Karen Beineman. On June 2nd, 1970, John's trial for the murder of Karen began. The prosecution brought in 47 witnesses, including John's roommate Arnold, along with the wig shop employees. 5 witnesses were brought in from the defense side, where 4 out of the 5 were supposed to be John's alibi for the night that Karen went missing. On August 19th, 1970, John Norman Collins was found guilty for the first-degree murder of Karen Sue Beineman. He showed no emotion when this verdict was announced, although his mom and his sister completely hollered, crying in the courtroom. John was sentenced to life in solitary confinement with hard labor, without the possibility of parole, in Southern Michigan prison. John was given a chance to address the courtroom before he was taken away, and he had a fairly lengthy note, but the main thing that he stated was that he never knew a girl named Karen Sue Beineman. He never had a conversation with her. He never took her to a wig shop. He never took her to his uncle's basement, and he never took her life. John Norman Collins has still never been tried for the murders of Mary Flasar, Joan Schell, Roxy Phillips, Marilyn Skelton, Dawn Basom, or Alice Calum. However, physical and circumstantial evidence exists in each case that links John to being the murderer, and police have no other possible suspects in the case. The following years after John's conviction, his family and friends have set on their beliefs that John was innocent and he was a victim of the miscarriage of justice. So for around 6 to 7 years after being incarcerated, during that time, John never did an interview, but he finally decided that he was going to do an interview. Everyone wanted to know his side of the story and what happened, but of course, he still continues to deny that he had any involvement with any of the Michigan murders along with Roxy Phillips in California. He explained that the key evidence that attested his innocence was suppressed by the prosecution and that the jury was biased. He also explained that the scientific testimony regarding the blood and hair comparisons were invalid. In October of 1977, John had to change to a Marquette branch prison because he was dealing drugs, and he also kind of worked with another inmate on an escape plan to get out of prison. The fellow inmate did escape successfully, but John broke his foot, so he couldn't escape with him. So he had to stay back in the prison. It's funny because he's in prison now. It's okay. We can laugh now. So in that prison in 1979, John and a few other inmates decided that they were going to have another escape plan, but some prison guards found out about this and they were transferred to a more secured block. In 1981, John requested that he be transferred to a Canadian prison with the hopes of being released early. John actually had dual citizenship in Canada, which underneath Canadian law, John would have been eligible for release after only serving 9 years of his prison sentence, and his application was approved. However, when the public got a hold of this information that John was possibly going to be transferred and released early, this wild card out in public again, going to kill people, this application was reversed and it was denied. So John tried to appeal his application being denied, but he lost, so too bad, John. On July 11th, 2005, Gary Earl Letterman was actually charged for the first-degree murder of Jane Louise Mixer. This was one of the victims that was one of John's possible victims. Gary was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole due to DNA evidence showing that Gary was the murderer of Jane Louise Mixer. Jane's case was reopened in 2001, and that is when DNA evidence proved that Gary was guilty. It is believed that he was the possible copycat killer of the Michigan murders, and he had more victims that involved the Michigan murders, or he was the Michigan murderer himself and John was innocent. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense that, John with the uncle in the basement. So I don't know, maybe John was the copycat killer and just didn't really do well with the one that he got. That sounds awful. That's not what I mean, but you know what I mean? John Norman Collins is still alive and is still serving his life sentence at the Marquette Branch Prison. He still remains his innocence and still denies any involvement in the Michigan murders with Karen, with any of them, just anything to do with all of it. I'm not sure why the police did not continue to investigate further into all of the girls and try him for those if they really believed that he was the suspect for all of the other murders. I mean, I understand when it came down to Gary in 2001, but that was also almost 20 years after, almost 20 to 30 years after, John was tried. So I don't know. Like, I don't know if he was actually responsible for all of them. All of the deaths and the crime scenes are very similar. But do you really believe that John, you know, was the murderer for Karen? Because I'm really confused on the evidence that they used against John. Like the evidence that they linked with John to convict him of murdering Karen. Like, was it truly enough evidence for Karen's murder? You know, like, what do you think? Do you think that he was responsible for all of them? Do you think that Gary was responsible for all of them? Do you think that Gary was actually the Michigan murderer and John tried to do one copycat killing and that happened to be Karen, but he was just kind of sloppy with it and that's why he was convicted? I don't know. This is hard. Sorry, my battery died, so if this is a little bit different of an angle, does look a little weird. This is just a little bit different. I had to change my battery, I'm sorry. But yeah, I want to know what y'all believe because this case is crazy. It's very, very, very graphic, so I'm really sorry about all that. I don't know, like that it's really hard because I genuinely don't know, you know, what to believe. I don't know. That's it for me today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe and tell your friends because I am here every single Thursday, except for the last 2 months. Now that I have a little bit more downtime to sit down and research and everything, I shouldn't miss for a while. Don't take my word on that though. But it's good to be back, so I'm glad to be back. Anyways, like I said, if you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, tell your friends, and yeah, I will be seeing you guys next Thursday with another video. Anyways, love y'all. Bye.